After firing Reichenbach, Eastman hired a succession of emulsion makers. They all failed.
The hiring and firings were amazing in those years, trying to find some way to get this emulsion down. But he even joked that he was going to start a praying department. All the hands would gather around and pray over the emulsion.
Late in 1893, Eastman hired William Stuber. He was not a chemist, but an award-winning photographer who made his own dry plates. His emulsions were based on formulas he had learned in Europe. For several months, he worked in complete secrecy. Even Eastman was not allowed into the lab. In the spring of 1894, Stuber finally produced a quality emulsion. When the new Kodak film came out, it was so good, even professional photographers began using it. And it arrived just in time to help a new industry get started: motion pictures. Within a few years, movie film became Eastman's biggest seller. His company was back on its feet. The world economy was also recovering from the Depression.
You not only have investment money, but you have the mechanisms in place now, Wall Street, you might say, to manage investments. And it is not surprising that beginning around 1898, you have a wave of mergers, smart people using investment monies to put together larger business enterprises.
The manifest destiny of the Eastman Kodak Company is to be the largest manufacturer of photographic materials in the world, or go to pot.
They have sold more Kodaks and made more money than they've ever made before. And now his conception, I think, really shifts to the point, okay, now what am I going to do with this?
In 1898, Eastman went to England to form an international company, Kodak Limited. If he succeeded, he would have a worldwide monopoly. He and Dickman met with investors. "Everything is in good shape," Eastman wrote to his mother. "Unless something quite unfortunate occurs, it will be an enormous success." On the afternoon of November 9th, Eastman was in his London office when George Dickman walked in with some papers for review. Suddenly, Dickman doubled over with severe abdominal pain.
There was no first aid room as such, and so the boardroom was cleared and George Dickman was laid down on the table. Eastman decided to send for an ambulance. And I think it's some indication here of the personal friendship between the two men, that when the ambulance came, Eastman insisted on getting into the back of the ambulance with George Dickman and accompanying him on the way home to Hampstead. There was not time to actually take him to hospital, so the surgeon came to Dickman's house and the operation was performed up in his bedroom.
Eastman was hovering over him, trying to do everything he could, and of course there was nothing he could do because he didn't have the knowledge, he didn't have the antibiotics.
Dickman seemed to rally a bit and seemed to be on the mend, but 6 days later, he died.
George Dickman died on the morning of November 15th, 1898. Later that day, Kodak Limited was formed. Eastman collected more than $900,000. He was now a millionaire. In the United States, the Eastman Kodak Company now dominated the industry. George Eastman used its power to buy out other companies, acquiring the technology to produce a cheaper version of the Kodak. In 1900, he released the Brownie, a camera almost everyone could afford.
The Brownie camera cost $1. That's roughly $20 by today's standards. So it was drastically cheaper than the original Kodak camera. And that was the camera that really revolutionized or democratized photography.
The Brownie was named after popular storybook characters. It was a shrewd move, aimed at selling the cheap camera to a new group of consumers, children.
One of the things I think that was clearly at work in Eastman's promotion of the Brownie camera was the idea that if he started children with a cheaper camera, they would work their way up to more expensive cameras later on, and they'd become full-grown, healthy Kodak junkies, buying one camera after another.
$150,000 Brownies were made in 1900. More cameras than Eastman had sold in the 12 years since he had introduced the Kodak. But the Eastman Kodak Company was facing a serious threat. The patent office had given Hannibal Goodwin a patent for celluloid film. Goodwin threatened to sue Eastman Kodak for infringement.
Film was the most profitable item for the Eastman Kodak Company. So what this had the potential of doing was to make an enormous claim on all of the film that was produced by the Eastman Kodak Company during the life of that patent.
When the patent dispute grew into a lawsuit, Eastman refused to settle. After a long legal battle, he lost. When he realized the judgment might be as high as $25 million, Eastman was stunned. Drawing on his company's vast resources, he was able to negotiate the payment down to $5 million. "Well, that's over," he said. "Now the one thing to do is forget it." The company's profits soared, so did his personal fortune. He would soon be listed as the 6th wealthiest man in the nation. Eastman assumed a more conservative style. The trim, dapper entrepreneur in waistcoats and ascots became a paunchy businessman dressed in dark suits. In 1905, he and his mother moved into a 37-room mansion he helped design. It was surrounded by extensive gardens, orchards, and livestock, maintained by a staff of 40.
He very much wanted his house to be run like the business, and so there are flow charts, and it was very well structured and organized as who reported to who.
Eastman made the gardeners count the roses on each vine to see which varieties produced better. He ordered monthly reports on the output of his cows and chickens. His housekeeper tracked household expenses with double entry ledgers, and she was audited once a year by public accountants. Even the morning breakfast followed a careful ritual. Organist Harold Gleason arrived early to play music that pleased his prickly boss. At exactly 7:30, as Eastman opened his bedroom door, Gleason began to play. The organist would try to sense his boss's mood as he entered the room and adjust the music accordingly. The conservatory table was always set with a linen tablecloth and his silver tea service. Sometimes guests were invited to join him, but increasingly over the years, he ate alone. In 1907, George Eastman's mother, Mariah, died at the age of 85.
For the next week, when people would come by, he would start to carry on a normal conversation, and then suddenly he would turn away and walk to the window and start fiddling with the curtain or something, and then he'd turn around and say, "I'm all right now."
George Eastman is such an intriguing figure. Here is a man who understood intuitively, early on, very early on, that you could take a distant and formalized high-tech system, photography, and make it a place where people could be intimate, playful, warm, and where they could remember the fond memories of their life. And the man himself, increasingly, as he lives longer, becomes less and less capable of intimacy.
Though Eastman invited people to his home for concerts and dinner parties, he was an uncomfortable host who often disappeared long before his guests departed. Josephine Dickman, who had moved to America, served as hostess for many events, fueling speculation among staff that she and Eastman might marry. She was the love of his life, said one, but Eastman remained a bachelor. In 1912, Eastman began to think about the legacy he would leave.
Eastman Kodak is, in a sense, his child, and he's doing everything he can to bring that child to full maturity so that that child can live on after George Eastman.
He established a research laboratory at Kodak Park to keep the company at the cutting edge of photography. He began giving away his personal fortune, ultimately amounting to $100 million. Some went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which was training many of his best scientists. To attract top talent to Rochester, he worked to overcome its provincial reputation. He built a theater, created a school of music, and gave large gifts to the university. In 1925, George Eastman, now 71, officially retired from Kodak. He named as president William Stuber, the man who had saved his company by fixing the emulsion. Eastman attacked retirement with the same obsessive energy he had given his company, orchestrating elaborate camping trips and African safaris.
Every meal was planned out. Every kind of activity that they were going to do was planned out, so that he would have enough of the guns, the ammunition, the clothing, the various equipment that they would need to do the fishing and the hunting of different animals.
He invited friends to join him. But over time, fewer accepted. They found little pleasure traveling with a man who never stopped being the boss. On one of these trips in 1928, Eastman was noticeably thinner and weaker. Soon, he had difficulty standing. His stride became slow and shuffling.
Medical experts today say that probably he would have been diagnosed with spinal stenosis. He knew he was headed to a wheelchair existence. It also would have made him incontinent, which was a very difficult thing for a man of his meticulous habits.
He was very much afraid of mentally deteriorating and not being able to recognize friends and family, not be able to converse, to not be in control of his own life to the very end.
The pain became so great that Eastman rarely left his bedroom. He confessed to a friend, "There isn't much to live for. All that most people come here for is to have me sign on the dotted line." On March 14, 1932, Eastman invited a few friends over to witness a change in his will. He seemed glad for the company. A little past noon, he asked everyone to leave, saying he had a note to write. Moments later, the household staff heard a gunshot. Lying in bed, Eastman had fired a single bullet from an automatic pistol into his heart. He was 77. On a nearby table, he left a note. "To my friends, my work is done. Why wait?" Thousands gathered to mourn George Eastman. He had given many of them successful careers. He had improved their city. But for people in all parts of the world, he had created something far more important.
The idea that you could capture warm, simple, and tender moments in your own life and save them so that you could remember them by looking at them, that's a radical idea of the time.
He was definitely a businessman first and foremost, but quite clearly he did introduce this element whereby we can all record our lives, capture our memories, happy memories, and lay down something for future generations. That must be Eastman's legacy.